I am very honored today to introduce to you Dr. Kiana O'Leary. She is an educational consultant and the founder of Minty Educational Services. She has extensive experience in pre-kindergarten through the 12th grade teaching and administration. She currently serves as an instructional assistant professor at Texas A&M University, where her research focuses on conversational leadership and coaching school administrators in culturally competent and inclusive leadership practices. In her debut book titled Lead with Truth, love that title, by the way, she reflects on her commitment to transparency and accountability while maintaining core values. Kiana, congratulations for the publishing of your article titled 5 Tips for a Great Relationship with Your Adult Child. And thank you for joining me here today for this interview.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for hosting, and it was a pleasure to interview with you on the article.
Thank you so much. As you may know, I'm a relationship coach that spends a lot of effort teaching people how to communicate, but conversational leadership is a term I've never heard before. Would you define that for us?
Oh, yeah. So my dissertation for earning my doctoral degree was in conversational leadership framework by Grossberg and Slynn. So I am not the owner of that framework. And what they believe is that in order for leaders to lead great and thriving organizations, that one should be really competent as a leader in 4 areas of conversation. And those areas of conversation, off the top of my head, are intimacy, um, interactivity. Um, what is the other one? Oh my goodness, they're losing me right now. But there are 4 major tenets of conversational leadership, and so what I was able to do in that particular dissertation was to follow 12 major leaders in the Los Angeles area, and just kind of shadow them to see how they were competent in these 4 areas, and then ask their staff to give them a score based on their competency in those 4 areas.
That must have been interesting. So you're located in the LA area?
So I'm originally from the Los Angeles area. I've been there all my life, and but recently relocated to Houston, Texas as of 2020.
Okay. So transitioning from parenting a dependent child to an adult child is a challenge some parents have difficulty doing. What do you see as the barriers to a successful transition?
I think as I mentioned before, I think the biggest challenge is lack of communication. And when I say lack of communication, it's really learning the communication style and preferences of both parties. The best analogy that I can use is the book Five Love Languages, where they encourage people who are in relationships to honor and learn their love preferences and learn their love styles. And once you learn those things, then you're able to better communicate or demonstrate love to one another. And I think very similarly to for parents and adult children, you have to learn each other's communication style and communication preference so that you can get the message across at a time that is most comparable and in a style that is most acceptable to both parties.
I think the timing of our communication is such an important piece. Sometimes we get to feeling urgent, like we have to say something right now, but it's not a good time if you want to optimize the receptivity of the other person by choosing a good time.
Correct.
You mentioned that there are 5 generations of adults in our culture now that each have different communication styles. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Of course, of course. So in my book, Lead with Truth, one of the things that I encourage school leaders to do is to really, take a tab of stickies and identify every single faculty member and group them by generation, and then really kind of look at what are the ways in which they respond to you best based off of communication. And so in that activity, many school leaders will find out that some of their boomers prefer to have things that are tangible. So they like letters, newsletters, or any type of documents inside of their mailbox was their preference. And then some of the younger generation, which would be some Gen Zers, they prefer things really quick, short, electronically, where they can look at it digitally and then keep going while they're in Starbucks line. And then in between, you have the Gen Xers who prefer emails, so they're in between electronics and in between a letter. It's still a hybrid of the two. And so just really learning that if you're going to communicate effectively to, at one point I had 175 teachers as a former school principal. And for all 175, I needed to make sure that I diversified my communication style so that I can get the same message, but it can be received by the different generations who were represented my campus.
That's a whole concept that I've never heard before either. And I realized myself, I'm 80, I just turned 80, and I realized how hard it was for me to get used to emails and then texting. And now it's, just part of my business life. But it was quite a shift. Like, why don't they just pick up the phone and call me?
Exactly, exactly. And congratulations to your 80th celebration. I honor that so much.
Thank
And
you.
in honoring that, I feel that we don't have to subscribe to one way of doing things. We can honor all people, we can respect all people. And that's really my whole message of inclusivity. Oftentimes when we hear the word inclusion, we think specifically of race or specifically of gender, but it could be something as simple as communication styles. How are we being inclusive to making sure that every person is heard and they're able to receive the message so that we all can attain the same goals?
The team that works for me, we meet every 2 weeks online on a Zoom call like this. And I just long for us to meet in person periodically. You know, I just, it just feels good to see them in person. I was so impressed when you said in relationship to your daughter, and I'm quoting you now, I humbled myself and started listening to truly understand who she was, what she liked, and how I could support her in her adult journey. I commend you for making that huge shift. Tell me what prompted you to do that and what have the results been in relationship to your daughter?
I think that what prompted me was my daughter was a freshman, maybe a sophomore in college, and learned or I noticed that there was some distance in me reaching out. She was on a college campus, I was in my home, and while we were less than 30 minutes away from each other, I was not seeing her as frequently as I would like to have seen her. And I think it was because she was hiding a part of her life that she didn't want to reveal to me because she may have thought that I would judge her or I wouldn't love her or I wouldn't accept it. And
Mhm.
so I learned that she had reached out to a family friend and had communicated something that was a really huge step for her. And I didn't want to not be a part of that process in her life. And so I had to humble myself to think of a couple of things. One, even if I disagree with this, or even if it's something that may shock me initially, I wanted to give her the space to communicate her truth. And if I loved her and truly valued who she was in my life, I mean, I didn't want to have any Thanksgivings without her. I didn't want to experience Christmases without her. So if I really wanted to have this person in my life, then I needed to sit and be a listener, ask questions, and learn who she was becoming as a young woman instead of restricting her to who I wanted her to be as a child.
I have so much respect for that step that you took. And I recently hosted a TEDx event in my community where Brenda Zane shared the concept of non judgmental curiosity and how the non judgmental questions enabled her to create emotional connection with her adult son that had been very, distant. I, you mentioned how important it was for you and your daughter to create realistic agreements. Tell us about that.
Yes, so I went to a Family First conference that my church holds every year. And one thing I learned from our leader was that, his suggestion was when your adult children return home, why don't you go to dinner and you have like a contract? And in the contract, it's each party recognizing things in the home or the cohabitation that should be agreed upon so that if there are any conflicts, you can return back to the shared agreements. And
Mhm.
so we agreed upon how frequently we would have our home clean, to what level we would have our home clean, groceries, bills, guest, even something as small as if someone is not going to return home, just the courtesy of, hey, I'm not coming home tonight. We agreed upon all those things. And so when we have, later on, I talked about having our crucial conversations,
Yes.
it's just really easy to return back to the agreements and say, based on these agreements, do we need to adjust the agreements? Or can we um, both agree that we'll return back to what we initially stated would be our way in which we cohabitate?
I think it's so smart to have everything out in the open, the agreement on paper. We had two of our children return home as adults, and we set up contracts with both of them. And it just made life so much simpler and easier for all of us because everything was out in the open. So I just appreciate that you did that with your daughter. You mentioned Crucial Conversations, the book by Carrie Patterson. Describe what that looks like. Apart from the agreement that you made when she moved back home, what are some other crucial conversations that you and your daughter have had?
Oh, wow. I would just say, oftentimes it may not start off as a crucial conversation, but when I feel it rising just emotionally, then I'll say, hey, it looks like we're going into a crucial conversation and we need to get to this sweet spot. And the sweet spot is not where I don't like saying, let's agree to disagree.
Yeah.
The sweet spot is let's agree to respect each other's perspective, even if it's different from mine. And so I want to hear your perspective and I want to have curious conversations about your perspective, but I also want you to hear my perspective. And so today we had a crucial conversation, and that crucial conversation really was just talking about Gen Zers in the workforce in corporate America, and she was communicating to me that there's lately has been some adversities because there's been corporate companies that have been found on purpose not hiring Gen Zers because they feel that they're rebellious or they feel that they are not willing to stick by the rules and appear to uphold the policies. And so she and I were just having a conversation where we both had some disagreements. And when I saw it kind of rising to an emotional stance between her and myself, then it was time to get to a place where we both can be heard,
Yeah.
but we can respect each other's point of view, even if we don't walk away agreeing.
It sounds like the key is maintaining, as you said, respect for each other's points of view. And that, I find that that means I have to take my turn listening and expect my adult kid, to take his turn listening. And that keeps the conversation level. We both feel heard, even if we disagree. What
And
are
I
the
think
most,
it's really it could be somewhat of a challenge. I mean, when you start this relationship off as the adult, you are the authoritative one. You have the final say. You make
yes.
all of the decisions because they are being reared at that time, and you are training or coaching or educating them on various topics. And I've even had to change my stance as a former educator. I now have former students who are in their 30s and mid 30s, and when they come back to say hi to me, I'm no longer in the space of their teacher, their wives, their husbands, their homeowners, their business owners. And so I even have to change my posture of the being the authoritative person in the classroom to now having a conversation with someone who was a former student but now is a respected adult as myself.
Yes. And you mentioned that one of the most common mistakes that parents make with in the transition with an adult child is trying to stay in that controlling role where you're the
Correct.
authority, you're the wise one dispensing guidance, and that's not what an adult child needs.
Correct. Correct.
You mentioned that many parents have trouble apologizing in order to
Mhm.
heal a broken relationship. You know, my son and I went through a few years where there was quite a bit of emotional distance between us, and I desperately wanted to talk about it. And the first time he agreed to talk about it, I I was not listening. I wanted him to appreciate what I was going through at a time when he thought I had abandoned him. And he got up and walked away. And by the time he was ready to talk about it again, I was ready to listen and
Mhm.
just hear how my behavior impacted him. And,
Mhm.
apologize for the things I did that definitely were very hurtful to him. And over a period of time, we repaired our relationship. And I have to give him a lot of credit for forgiving me for the times that I had really let him down. But I also credit myself because, like you said, I was finally ready to listen and apologize for things that had really hurt him. You mentioned,
I commend you on that because that is just not a space where most parents find themselves. A lot of times they lean on the well, I was just being the best parent that I could be at the moment, and I wasn't told those things when I grew up. And while all those things may be true, there still is another truth that exists, and that is that child of yours was harmed or
yes.
experienced some toxicity that needs to be repaired.
And for me, the repair of the relationship was more important than my pride
Correct.
or any excuses I could give him for what I was going through during the times when he was hurt. We've had a great relationship now for the last several years, and I'm so grateful for it. It was
Hmm.
worth the humbling that I needed to.
I love that quote. You should put it up on a wall somewhere. The repair meant more to me than my pride. I think
Yes.
that quote would be on a shirt and people would buy it. It would go viral.
Okay. So one of the things you mentioned also that was important was letting go of irrelevant traditions such
Mhm.
as heavy holiday cooking was one that you mentioned. Would you share how your relationship with your own mother affected you when it came to carrying on traditions and needing to let go of some of them?
Yeah, I think that my mother, my biological mother has transitioned, and I still have my bonus mom, and I was fortunate to have two beautiful mothers who got along greatly with one another.
Oh,
And I would say with my bonus mom who is still here with me, when she comes into town, she still wants to do heavy cooking. She still wants to do some of the traditions, and I honor those traditions, but I didn't want to carry on something that had little meaning for my daughter, and
yes.
it really didn't have much meaning for me. I just conformed as a young person to what my family preferred, but I often would cook and I would look up and I would be tired, exhausted. I didn't enjoy the food, or the food is picked over and I don't get the best of the food because I really believed in being a great host. I really loved being the Martha Stewart host, but the Martha Stewart host does not get to enjoy the holidays as much as everyone else because you're making sure that there are fresh flowers and you're making sure there's great linen and you're doing all the things to host everyone and you're not getting served. And so when my daughter made the suggestion that we go to a nice restaurant, it was such an eye opener, and I kind of got spoiled. And so now that has been our new tradition that we attend nice restaurants so that I can be served and she can be served and we can enjoy the holidays and go back and we don't have dishes to clean and the home is still clean. I'm not exhausted and I get to dress up and put on beautiful clothes and makeup. So it works for both of us.
Trying to put on a magazine holiday, it,
Yes,
it sometimes backfires. I mean, if you take pleasure and there's joy in the preparation, then great. But if you end up exhausted and irritable and resentful, then forget it.
correct, correct.
Tell me
And I
about,
think there are moments where I still like to do those things, but it doesn't have to be around the holidays. I mean, I choose other opportunities to do it.
tell me about your quote unquote calling.
Ooh,
A friend of yours called you the young person whisperer.
I would say that for whatever reason, um, I have the ability to listen to the hearts of young people, and they could say a statement to their mom and say the same statement to me, and I pick up on the statement of what they mean, and then I'm able to translate it over to their mom. I don't know how that dynamic worked. I attribute it much to being in education, and I attribute it to much of still trying to stay in the loop. So when my daughter and her girlfriends and friends come around, I try to have an ear out to like, what does that mean? Or, I learned one last night. We went to a Houston Rockets basketball game last night, and they did this to each other. I said, "Ooh, what does that mean?" And they explained to me what it meant, and I said, "Oh, okay, now I could use that in my lingo." And so I think it's the intentionality of wanting to learn and be a part of their world,
Mhm.
and not distant myself. I don't act young. I still act my age, but I'm able to have I'm young at heart and I'm able to communicate with them in a way that's effective. And so sometimes I find myself being a mediator or even just being a mentor to some of the children in my village and even outside of my village so that I could strengthen the communication between them and their families.
I think that's a gift, an intuitive gift, as well as being very intentional about your education, your training, and using that with the young people that you come in contact with. My husband, late husband, and I used to teach communication skills classes to couples, and couples would sometimes, I'm going to sneeze, so I'm going excuse me,
God bless.
I'm in twos. Someone in the class would ask a question or make a statement, and Jim would interpret it one way, and I would hear the meaning underneath. And he just was amazed, and it has something to do with intuition
Mm,
and a
mm, mm.
gift. I love at the end of your article, you said that you would love to see family therapy sessions embedded into the school system. I'm all for that. In school, we learn so much that in the long run isn't helpful to us. It would be so awesome to learn about emotional management and relationship skills. We need those daily for the rest of our lives. Is there any hope that that could happen?
I'm hopeful for, we're seeing a shift in how educational funding is going to be spent, and hopefully when they go to the table and they ask experts, what should we do with the funding and what should we do with the changing, that someone outside of myself will consider the value of family therapy. And
Yeah.
I learned it because in one of my roles as an educator, I worked at an alternative school, and these were students who had been they had done some time in juvenile hall or they had done some time behind bars and they were returning back to society. So the rule was they had to spend a year on my campus and then I would make a recommendation if they were ready to return back to the comprehensive site. And in that, I learned that many of them their road to criminalization started somewhere in middle school, that there was some trauma or some hurt or harm that they experienced as a young person, which led them to a life of crime. I also learned that we would teach them techniques or strategies on how to navigate through society, but then they would return back to their families and it would be really different. Those values would be really different than the values that we had at the school. And
Right.
so I thought if we could all be on one page where maybe we could learn their family values and they can learn our values here, and then we could kind of come up with some core values that the students could hear both at home and at school so that we could cultivate some habits that would lead to people who would just be better citizens for our society. So I think family therapy would be helpful because if we only give therapy to the students, we're going to identify some challenges, but they'll just go back and return to the environment that will reinforce the harm that we have just repaired. So I think it would be best if there was some requirement where families had to do therapy once or twice a year so they can unpack some of the challenges that their
Oh
students may be
gosh,
going through.
I love that idea, and I hope that that will be adopted in the near future if we're really fortunate.
Yeah.
How can our listeners connect with you?
I am available through LinkedIn. That's a great way or a great start. I do have a business, Minty Educational Services. And if you go on our website, you'll see that we have podcasts that come out on the first and third Monday. And we talk to different educators about various topics. So that's another place to find me. And good old fashioned Instagram and Facebook, there are also opportunities to connect with me.
I'm curious to know what the significance is of that name, Minty.
Oh, yes. Speaking of which, so yesterday we celebrated Harriet Tubman for those who Women Empowerment Month, and they celebrated Harriet Tubman and um, her social activism for leading slaves to free North.
Yes.
And I watched the movie Harriet with some educator friends of mine, and I learned that her birth name that her parents gave her was Arminta.
Okay.
And for her nickname, her dad called her Minty. And so
Oh,
the business is named after Harriet Tubman.
oh, that gives me goosebumps. I've heard the name Arminta. I had a friend a few years ago that by that name, but I never would have derived Minty from that. So I'm really glad to know that that had something to do with Harriet Tubman. Such an amazing, amazing woman.
Yes.
Kiana, thank you so very much for spending these few minutes with me today. I so appreciate you and the work that you're doing and the lives that you are touching for good.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And I'm just so honored to have met you and to connect with you in this capacity.
Thank you so much. Maybe we'll be able to stay in touch.
Would like that. Thank you.
I would like that as well.